Well, good afternoon and welcome to the homestead. My name is Jonathan. Hope you're having a great afternoon. We have a perfectly beautiful day this afternoon, gentle rolling breeze coming through here on the porch. And so I am very happy that we are not having to do a fireside chat or an imaginary tropical island chat or whatever else we've been doing, or me sitting out here freezing to death on the porch. So this is great. Excited for another week to sit down and just talk and consider all the things that are going on in the world, consider our lives, our families, our thought process as we approach all of those things. Some of us are focused on our own immediate world, some of us are focused on things way outside our control, or work, church things. They're just a lot of things to think about. And so it's good, I believe, just to take some time, preferably every day, but, at least once a week to really sit down and consider uh, the decisions that we're making, the way that we're preparing for things that are coming in the future. And particularly tonight, we're going to be discussing the topic expect the unexpected. And if the Lord, if you were to ask me, well, what is God teaching you right now? I think this is a theme that is beginning to really come through. And that is to expect the unexpected, both in the positive sense, the exciting sense, to expect those things, to expect to see God to move in spite of how things appear, to expect Him to provide and deliver in excited ways and in unexpected ways. And in fact, as I'm thinking about it, it really reminds me of the title of the Hobbit movie, The Unexpected Journey. There's something exciting about the unknown. If you're an adventurous spirit, and you never really sure what's just around the corner. That can be a great thing. But then there's also that flip side where there's unexpected things that happen: cancer, heart attacks, car wrecks, job loss. I mean, those things that we don't want to happen in our lives, and so both of those things are to be. This sounds like I'm saying the word expected a lot in this. To be expected, and yet many of us, in fact, I would journey to say, having been a student of people for quite some time, I would journey to say that most of us have this illusion of control, that somehow we can just control our circumstances, and through our decision making and through maneuvering and manipulation and planning and scheming, we can somehow avoid potential pitfalls or place ourselves in a path where there's just going to be nothing but prosperity. And while I mean, I am a big believer in, grabbing a hold of your destiny and grabbing a hold of your life and not just letting things happen and just kind of wasting your life away, not doing anything. I also recognize that there are many, many things in my life that happen hourly that are outside of my control. And that's tough. I think that's really hard, especially for those of us that have that perception that we're in control. When unexpected things happen, it can really cause us frustration and disappointment, especially if we have long term unmet expectations and we develop a sense of hopelessness, and we kind of give up and we quit really trying to accomplish the goals that the Lord's put on our hearts. We just are living a defeated life, and that by no means is how I believe we were meant to live. And so there is, I think, a way to approach this and think about this that can turn that fear and uncertainty, the FOMO, the fear, uncertainty, and or the FUD, the fear, uncertainty, and the doubt, into something that is more like excitement and anticipation, and something that produces hope in our hearts. And honestly, I really believe it's not our circumstances that affect that feeling in us, or that cognitive process in us, but rather it's how we approach it. Because the truth is, all of the things in the world are happening around us in spite of how we think about it, how we feel about it. What's happening in Ukraine now is just an absolute travesty. I mean, I saw today the satellite imagery of these mass graves where Russian soldiers are just mass murdering Ukrainians and just throwing them in piles and in holes. It's just an atrocity. It makes me think of the Holocaust from World War II and other terrible things that have happened. And it's just unbelievable that I can be sitting here on this porch with birds chirping and the sheep sheeping, and while tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands, of people are being killed in a brutal and terrible way. And so it just seems, I think the juxtaposition of those two things just seems overwhelming at times. And sometimes we feel frustrated that we can't help. Sometimes we feel overconfident that we really can help. And but I believe that God speaks to this. I believe the scriptures speak to this, and I believe that if we are able to take the right information and we allow the power of the Holy Spirit to be the number one force of locomotion in our lives, that we can begin to project hope and encouragement and confidence and peace, probably more than all of those things, peace. I guess it depends how old you are. If you're a little bit younger, you're probably looking for adventure. If you're getting a little bit, hopefully I said younger, I meant younger if I didn't say that. If you're getting a little bit older, then sometimes you just want to sit peacefully on the porch. And so, or maybe that's just me. I don't know. Maybe the rest of you guys are like, that seems really boring. That's not what I want to do. And that's okay. You do you, I'll do me. But there's a way to accomplish that consistently and not be tossed about by the hardships in life. And so I believe that that begins when we change our mindset, and instead of being surprised by all the things that happen in the world, and maybe we have to take off our filters, our glasses. Just I think some of us have these glasses and they're just dark and foggy and dreary, and everything that happens is always bad and sad, and you're always, it's just woe is me, and I'm a victim, and the world's against me, and I'm never gonna do this or that, and I'm just waiting for what to just fall in a hole and die tomorrow. And then there's the pink, bright rosy glasses where you put those on, just everything's always good all the time, and we're just walking around this imaginary world, and people are living in absolute poverty. We don't care. We're just over here doing our thing. People lost their husband. Don't care. People don't have food to eat for dinner. Don't care. We're just kind of in this just rose-colored world, and we're only thinking about ourselves and what feels good for us. And so we need to take off the glasses and begin to see the world for what it is. And that's tough. That's really tough because each of us brings with us um, a bias, or as we call in psychology, or not psychology, in philosophy, a presupposition. And presuppositions are where you approach the world with a predetermined idea of how things are, a predetermined idea of what might happen or what's most probable to happen, what your role in that should be, what your responsibilities are, what you should and should not do. And so a lot of those things come from the way our parents were, how we were raised, things we learned in school, kind of friends that we've had, the kinds of shows that we watch on TV, the kinds of music that we listen to. All of those things work together to shape those ideas. And then at some point, we come into confrontation with truth. And that's part of the pain and suffering that we experience as human beings in our minds. And it comes from the clash of how we think the world should be or how we perceive it and how it actually is. It's like hitting a wall, and it's very it's jarring. If you've ever run into a wall, you're in the dark and maybe you misjudged where the door was and just boom, you just plowed right into it. In the middle of the night when you get up to go to the bathroom or whatever. And so, in my case, go out in the field and make sure the sheep aren't getting eaten by coyotes. So it's a very intricate thing, also. And so we're going to be talking about that tonight. We're going to be looking at a specific story out of the Old Testament in the book of Daniel. And in fact, if you have a Bible and you would be willing to follow along with me, and I would invite you to do that, we're going to be looking at Daniel chapter 3. And I think this is just a great way, if we would perceive the world in somewhat of a way as the three characters in this story, I think we would have a lot better time finding our way through the journey of life, because when we have a predetermined path and when we think things are going to be a certain way, we're going to continue to clash with truth and reality over and over and over again, and it's going to be a very difficult journey. What would be some examples of that? Well, there's been a lot of times in my life where I have thought things were going to turn out better than they were. I'm thinking back on our time as church planners when it just seemed like we're going to go out and start this new work, and thousands of people are going to respond to the message of the gospel, and we're going to just do missions all over the world and all seven continents, and ride a Starship SN1 to the moon and Mars, and everyone there's going to get saved too. And it's just these big dreams of what was going to be like, and it's going to be easy, and I wasn't thinking about all the hard work. And some of those things did happen. We did do missions in several different continents, and a lot of people did respond to the gospel message. But there was a lot of hardship, and there was a lot of enduring and striving, and so it was just different than what my mindset was. Another thing in my life was farming, for example. I kind of grew up in the city. I really had no interest in that. And as I got older and I got into preparedness, particularly, and I got interested in being self sufficient, I realized that the best place to do that is out here where you have resources and the ability to grow food and raise livestock and produce your own power and have your own water source and all those kind of things. So I had these grandiose ideas of what the farm was going to look like, and all the money that I was going to make from all my genius strategies and all this stuff. And so and how it was just our lives were going to slow down, and we're just going to live the good old country life. And so, then of course, some of those things were true, but then there was also the freezing cold and the really hot days in the market. Okay, there we go. Sorry about that. I think we lost the stream, so I don't know if that was an internet issue or what. So sorry about that. But anyway, I was talking about farming and talking about what it was like to kind of come into the contact with that wall of reality. And there was while there were times where life slowed down, there was also we had our ministry, and Stephanie had her teaching career, and the kids had all their things. So there's still a lot of busyness, and so there were things about it that were hard, and especially I think I've shared this with several of you guys before. Just trying to keep the sheep alive. It's terrible when a coyote gets a lamb, or when a dog gets sick and dies, or there's just things that happen that are hard. And when you hit that wall, you come into contact with reality. Then that idea of how things should be can really just put a storm cloud over your life and over your mind. And over time, if you just keep hitting that wall repetitively, it's just like in real life. You keep stubbing your toe on the same spot, you're going to break your toe, or you're going to have a really, really sore toe, or be limping through life. And so there must be a better way to approach those situations, to handle those situations. And perhaps the problem is that we don't expect the unexpected. Perhaps the problem is that we're just assuming how things are going to be. Maybe we heard somebody talk about it, or we watched it, or we saw it on YouTube, or whatever it is. And so maybe we need to begin to let go, try to control things, and either not at all or in a much more restrained manner, and maybe just be willing to accept what happens without imposing our will or our preconceptions or our expectations on it. And in fact, we have a great story that I think assists us in that. So let's just take a little bit of time and read it. We begin with a king, King Nebuchadnezzar, and he, for whatever reason, has built this gigantic statue. In fact, it says the statue was 90 feet high and 9 feet wide. And it says he set it up on the plain of Dura in the province of Babylon. King Nebuchadnezzar sent word to assemble the satraps, prefects, governors, advisors, treasurers, judges. So basically, a who's who in the empire. And so he's called all his leaders, and they so that they can dedicate this statue that he had set up. And so then it goes on. It says they stood before the statue that Nebuchadnezzar had set up, and a herald loudly proclaimed, "People of every nation and language, you are." Now remember, a lot of the nations had been conquered, and so that's why he's basically saying every province in the empire, everybody, every culture, every people group, come around, because we're going to now bow down and worship this amazing statue. And it says, and there are specific instructions. So it says, when you hear the sound of the horn, the flute, the zither, the lyra, the harp, the drum, and every kind of music, you are to fall down and worship the gold statue that King Nebuchadnezzar has set up. All right, so when the band plays, it's kind of like musical chairs. When the music's going, you're bowing to this thing. But whoever does not fall down, sorry, my Bible decided to go on to the next chapter. But whoever does not fall down and worship will immediately be thrown into a furnace of blazing fire. Well, that doesn't sound very good. So it's basically, you're going to do this or you're going to die. Therefore, when all the people heard the sound of all these instruments, they fell down and they worshipped this gold statue that King Nebuchadnezzar could set up, because obviously they did not want to get burned to death, which would be a terrible, terrible way to die. Now in verse 8 it says, some Chaldeans took this occasion to come forward and maliciously accuse the Jews. And they said to King Nebuchadnezzar, may the king live forever. You as king have issued a decree that everyone who hears the sound of the horn, the flute, the zither, the lyre, the harp, the drum, and every kind of music must fall down and worship the gold statue. But whoever does not fall down and worship will be thrown into a furnace of blazing fire. There are some Jews you have appointed to manage the province of Babylon, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. These men have ignored you, the king. Of course, they're appealing to his pride. And they do not serve your gods or worship the gold statue that you have set up. Then in a furious rage, which kind of tells you, what kind of a man King Nebuchadnezzar was, he gave orders to bring these three men, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. And so these men were brought before the king. And Nebuchadnezzar asked them, is it true that you don't deserve, that you don't serve my gods or worship the gold statue that I have set up? Now, if you're ready, when you hear the sound of the horn, flute, zither, lyra, harp, drum, and every kind of music, fall down and worship the statue that I made. So he's basically giving him a chance. He's like, okay, here's the deal. I'm not messing around. I'm going to send you into this blazing furnace unless you bow down and worship this gold statue. So Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego replied to the king, Nebuchadnezzar, we don't need to give you an answer to this question. If the God we serve exists, then he can rescue us from the furnace of blazing fire, and he can rescue us from the power of you, the king. So they're not going to bow down. They're upfront about it. They're not kind of like, well, should we do it? Should we not? I mean, do you think God really cares? I mean, what if we just, on the inside we're standing up, but on the outside we're bowing down? Nope, they didn't play any games. They just spoke plain, and they said, we're not going to bow down to this thing. And in fact, we believe that that the Lord is going to help us through this situation, even if you throw us into the furnace. And I think what's interesting, I stopped just shy of reading this verse. He said, but even if he does not rescue us, meaning God, capital H, We want you as king to know that we will not serve your gods or worship the golden statue that you set up. And remember that in the Old Testament specifically, God absolutely abhorred to idols. And the bowing down to an idol, that would be like, I don't know what the big sins are now, that would be like, some big sexual sin, or that would be like lying under oath, or murder, or it's a big deal. It's a big deal. I know that some of us are like, idols, like I don't even understand that, the idol thing, but it's a big deal, because that was how, in that time, that's how people guided their lives through these imaginary gods that they would make these little statues of, and whether you're like the ancient Scandinavians, or African tribal religions, or all kinds of different polytheists throughout the world, they would always create some kind of image of their god as a kind of a focal point, so that you could focus on the image of that false god or goddess, and worship it and interact with it in some way. And in fact, what's really fascinating to me about this, I was listening to the book of Enoch being read, which is a book outside of the scriptures. So I personally do not consider it, to be of high standing like the canon, the biblical canon, but it does give us, I think, some interesting historical information. And it's hard to say, how accurate that is. But one of the things that's really interesting, these angels that were cast out of heaven down to earth, the Nephilim that are referenced to, when Cain went to find his wife in the land of Nod, and other places. One of the things that they brought with them was they caused the human population to get into these sins. And one of the particular sins that they introduced was astrology, kind of this, worship of the stars, or being guided by the stars, and this divination, and all kinds of interesting things that God told the Israelites that they were not to be a part of. And so I find it interesting that, even this much later historically than that early period of time, that still, those sins that were introduced are still being practiced by those outside of the people of God. And so it was a big deal. And they knew it. Nebuchadnezzar understood that. These three Jewish men understood that. But what he says is that even if God doesn't rescue us, we're going to be faithful. We're going to stay true and faithful to what God's told us to do, and we're not going to bow down to that statue. And so they had, I believe, a realistic expectation of what was going to happen. And in fact, they were expecting the unexpected. They were saying, our God can rescue us from this furnace. He could in some way, and of course that seems unreasonable, right? I'm kind of a reasonable, rational I'm not an empiricist, but I definitely have that slant a little bit. So miracles are hard for me. Something that I can't explain or understand, or that seems to be the exception rather than the rule, drives me nuts, quite frankly. I like consistent, the river is just flowing smooth and calm and consistent, and so many, gallons per minute down the way here. So it's tough for me to allow for, in my perception of the world, or in my worldview, these miracles, these things that seem to be outside of what I understand. But the truth is, just because it's outside of what I understand, it doesn't make it irrational or illogical or magical, or in some way that it would make it unreasonable. It's just, again, my perception, my expectation that because people tend to get burned up in fires, that always will be the case. But these three men seem to really have faith that God was going to see them through this task, and they didn't put upon him their expectations to deliver them, or that he for sure wasn't. That they're just convinced. In fact, they were open to it, and they seemed to confidently and consistently, and I'm sure they were anxious. I'm sure that they had some doubts. I'm sure that they felt uncertain as far as what was going to happen, but they were confident enough in the one true God to know that whatever the outcome was, that staying on the right path, staying on a path of goodness, righteousness, whatever you want to call it, that was the correct decision to make, in spite of all of the other things. And so, because of that mindset, that gave them the courage, I believe, and I think that's how the power of God works. We open the door to it, and once that door is open, then we have the opportunity, the courage to walk through the door. And certainly they did. So at this response, King Nebuchadnezzar was filled with rage once again, and the expression on his face changed. And he gave orders to heat the furnace 7 times more hot or more than was customary. 7 times. Well, I'm not sure how hot a furnace has to be to, you know, burn something up. I'm going to guess, 3, 4, 500 degrees Fahrenheit. So 7 times that. That's really hot. And in fact, so hot that it says he commanded some of his strongest soldiers in the army to tie up Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego and throw them into this furnace of blazing fire. But and they, of course, they had their trousers, their robes, their head covering, all their clothes. And they were thrown into the furnace. But what's interesting, in verse 22, we see that these soldiers were actually burnt up. They were consumed by the fire because it was so hot that they had to get so hot, getting close to the fire, that they just combusted. They just got burnt up. And I can imagine that happening. I've been really close to some big fires, and for long story, won't get into, but I mean it. It singed my eyebrow hairs and my arm hairs, and I wasn't even on fire. It gets so hot, you get so close to that, and things just start to burn. Kind of not terribly unlike in a nuclear detonation. Depending on how close you are to the blast zone, then just the sheer extreme heat that it's produced by that nuclear reaction can just absolutely melt every living thing nearby. So this was a very hot fire, obviously. And then it says in verse 23, these 3 men, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, fell bound into the furnace of blazing fire. Then King Nebuchadnezzar jumped up in alarm, and he said to his advisors, "Didn't we throw these 3 men bound into the fire?" "Yes, of course, your majesty," they replied to the king. But he exclaimed, "Look, not tied, walking around in the fire, unharmed, and the fourth looks like a son of the gods." All right, so we're not. It's hard to say exactly what that meant, but apparently it looked cool, in some way that's like superhuman, let's say, in some way. So, possibly one of the angels, but again, you can't know that for sure. But, obviously this angel of the Lord, or whatever it was, looked, pretty big and bad, like a super savage Viking. And this guy was protecting them, apparently, in some way, because, there were 3 that went in, but now there's actually 4 in there. And then Nebuchadnezzar approached the door of the furnace of blazing fire, and he called out to the 3 men, "Shadrach, Meshach, Abednego, servants of the Most High God, come out." Now, that's an interesting change in tone, because before, here's my golden statue, we're going to bow down and worship it, and all of the pagan gods of the empire. And now, oh, looks like we got a kitty. I see a kitty. She probably thinks I'm talking to her. The animals all seem to have a little bit of this complex where they kind of feel like the world revolves around them. And yeah, I see you. I see you. I'm not talking to you, but I see you. I'll come over, and you can scratch and on my leg, and we'll play a little bit. Then it says Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego came out of the fire, and then all these satraps, prefects, governors, all these leaders, all these advisors, they gathered around, and they saw the fire, and it had no effect on the bodies of these men. So everybody saw it. It wasn't just one person, but like many times where miracles are performed and we see them in the scriptures. Oh, I know it's so hard to be a kitty, isn't it? So hard to be a kitty. So they're all amazed and they're all witnessing this together, thinking, this extremely hot furnace should have just, melted these guys to ash, and yet here they are alive. And it says, not a hair on their heads was singed. Their robes were unaffected. There was no smell of fire on them. And Nebuchadnezzar exclaimed, praise to the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. He has sent his angel and rescued his servants who trusted in him. So the proof's in the pudding. Don't scratch on that, ornery little cat. Yeah, leave that alone. So he was able to identify what happened, realize that his gods apparently didn't quite have the power he thought they had, but there was this one true God, the God that the Jews worship, this most high God, as he talked about him just a few verses back, kind of coming to this realization that, like, wow, something unexpected has happened here. Then he said, as a result of this, I issue a decree that anyone of any people, nation, or language who says anything offensive against the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego will be torn. Don't do that. Everyone's going to think there's an earthquake. We had an earthquake last week. Come here. All right, come here. Okay, all right. We're going to have to give this critter a little bit of attention, or else we're never going to be able to have this show. So this is, let's see, this is one of TT's babies, who's not a baby anymore. I'm trying to remember. It's not Crony. What's your name? Well, I'll think of it in a minute. She's got lots of babies. In fact, bless her heart, our neighbor Melissa is got all the cats because they all like her for some reason a lot right now. So I try to take her. I need to take her by some cat food. So Melissa, if you're watching, I owe you some bags of cat food. Haven't forgotten. Okay, back to the story. Hopefully there will be no further interruptions. My apologies. So he says that if anybody says anything offensive against this God, okay, now we're talking about the one true God, then they will be torn. This guy just got a little bit of anger issues, I'm just saying. It will be torn limb from limb. His house be made a garbage dump. Okay, so that's bad. Like, again, it's like, okay, bow down and worship this thing, or I'm going to burn you in a fiery furnace, or now you're going to worship the one true God, or actually, if you're going to, I guess, just don't say anything offensive against this true God, or else I'm going to make your house a pile of garbage, and I'm going to tear you limb from limb. Just saying, a little anger management probably would be good for this king. And he rewarded then, and this is how the chapter ends in verse 30, the king rewarded Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego in the province of Babylon. So let's talk about the expectation. So, imagine you're Shadrach and you realize, okay, the king has asked me to do something, the government has asked me to do something that I just cannot do. That is just too far. It's a line I can't cross because of my moral convictions and because of my belief, my religious beliefs, and therefore I may suffer the consequences, and those consequences would be death. And I mean, I can imagine these men may have had families. I mean, I'm sure they had some family, at least parents. It's unclear how old they were. We don't necessarily know all of their background, but they had things to lose, just like you and I do, and yet they recognize that they would be willing to pay the price for being faithful to the one true God. And honestly, probably if I put myself in that place, my expectation would be that this is coming to an end. My AR-15, my food storage or whatever is not going to save me from the fiery furnace. That they're coming for me, and this is going to end badly. And the other guys, they could have maybe thought the opposite. Maybe they just had this grandiose thought of, okay, the Lord's gonna, rescue me, and I'm not worried about the fiery furnace. I mean, we don't know, but just like today, we all have different thoughts about things, and some of us feel like, God's just never gonna let us go through any suffering or hurt or frustration or pain. That He's always got it, and so it's just always gonna be, we got our rosy colored glasses on, and so it seems that these men were just steady, faithful, and perhaps if they weren't before through this situation, just as we're learning, the key is really to not have an expectation. Just to That doesn't mean not to count the cost. I mean, clearly they did, right? They said to Nebuchadnezzar, that our God may rescue us from this. That you don't have any power over him. That the only way that this is really going to happen is if he allows it, or he may allow it, and that just may be, for his glory. We're going to, be sacrificed in the fiery furnace for what we believe. But they didn't allow the outcome how they expected the outcome to be, to control their actions and to control their life. That just to either be living in fear or to be living in, pie as the sky, everything's great. And so they appear to be balanced in that. And if not at the time, certainly afterwards, when they saw God unexpectedly, at least from my perspective, unexpectedly show up, and this angel that looks, like a son of the gods, as Nebuchadnezzar describes it, in a pretty powerful and apparently high drama, high theatrics, high, movie magic way, protected these men from the natural consequences of being superheated in a combustible chamber or fiery furnace, whichever you prefer to call it. And so, what a powerful story that teaches us to expect the unexpected. That if we just make that our new expectation, instead of our expectation being, okay, this is going to happen, or this is going to happen, or this isn't going to happen, or, instead of living our life like that, to just say, you know what, it's futile for us to worry about it, to be obsessed with it, to be discouraged by it, to be, overly optimistic about it, but just to wake up and just say, just really, in a sense, instead of bowing down to this golden statue, just to bow down to the Lord and say, God, whatever you have for me today, I accept it. If it's going to be a great day, bring it. Let's go. If it's going to be a hard day, bring it. Let's go. To have that mindset that as we come into contact with life, we don't have to put up these walls that are just going to be barriers that we just keep hitting over and over and over again, but that we're going to be able to tear down those walls before they ever go up, that we can walk through life unimpeded, unimpaired. These men clearly had a course of action that they were committed to. They clearly understood God's laws, right and wrong. They clearly had committed to following the Lord and being faithful regardless of the circumstances. So they weren't, they weren't obsessed by it, by the outcome. They weren't focused on the outcome. And honestly, guys, I'll just kind of be, have a personal moment with you. That's hard for me. I really have a hard time with that. I'm kind of a planner, strategist. I love to play Risk, the board game, military board game. I love to play real-time strategy games on PC. I just love that, just that, seeing the master plan and maneuvering my pieces in such a way and building up my forces and, all this kind of stuff. That's just how I roll. And to say, okay, it's just like when someone rage quits on the board and they just throw the board up and all the pieces go everywhere. You're just saying, okay, just whatever happens. That doesn't mean that you're just, walking around aimlessly through life. I mean, we're still focused, and we're learning, and we're refining, and we're executing the plan that God has for our life. So don't misunderstand. That's not just a license to just do whatever, to go back to the 1960s and be a hippie, but it is rather, it takes that emotional pressure off of us. It takes that terrible pressure of, my life has to go like this, it has to look like this, and I have to be like this. And that's why we're so obsessed with plastic surgery and making our teeth look a certain way, and our hair, and And some of us are trying to grow more hair, some of us are trying to get rid of hair. I mean, it's kind of comical. I mean, it's not funny, but it's kind of funny a little bit too, that we're so obsessed with making a certain set of circumstances happen. We have a hard time just being still and listening. Last night I had the privilege to lead youth while Pastor Casey was on vacation. Had a ton of fun. I don't know if the kids will ever want me to come back again or not, but we had a blast. And we talked about that a little bit. We're talking about the value of having a quiet time. And I challenged the students to take just a small portion of your quiet time. I challenged them. I said, just take 60 seconds and just sit and be still and listen. Sit and be still and listen. Can you do that without your mind just going nuts? And that's a challenge for me. Not just for younger people, but it's a challenge for me to be still and to listen and to not have a certain outcome that I have to have. I mean, every day I'm continually, just like many of you, I'm discouraged when a certain set of events happens. I'm elated when another set of events happen, and wanting this business to do well, or wanting this ministry to do well, or wanting this aspect of the farm to get solved, or whatever it is, or wanting my kids to have success in this area, and at the end of the day, I can't control the outcome. I can do my part. I can do my absolute best. I mean, I can invest my energy, my time, my preparations, my skills, however many or few they are. I can invest those things, but the return is up to the Lord. And that's hard. That's hard. Many of us want the return that we want. If I invest XYZ, I want this back. And life does not work that way. So let that sink in. Just accept it. I think it's better to accept it than just to keep fighting it, keep hitting those walls. And when you do accept it, it's very freeing. And I have those times where I come to that place and I accept that. And then it's very freeing, because now the burden's off of me. That I have a burden to an extent to do my best in the situation. But at the end of the day, the Lord allows what he allows. And we know that for this season, he's allowed corruption and sin to reign in the world. He's called us to be light in the darkness. And so we can either be faithful in that light, or we can turn our light off and just sit in darkness. And it's a choice that we make. But whatever outcome that we experience in our life, whether it's what happens at our job, what happens with our education, what happens with the ministries that we're involved in, ultimately, the ultimate conclusion of those things is outside of our control. It's not outside of our influence. It's not outside of our ability to be a part of it, to interact with it. But the ultimate outcome is outside of our ability to control. And that's tough. I mean, if you're a controller, I try to say that nice. See, I didn't call you a control freak. I called you a controller. Then that's just tough. It's just tough. In fact, some of you're not believing me right now. You're saying, well, a man is made of he's the sum of his efforts and investments. And so whatever he, invests in, he's going to bring that return. And there is wisdom in that. There is a correct portion of that. But I can think of a whole lot of people that did a whole lot of things. And they tried hard. They were the smartest or the richest or the brightest or the most influential, but the goal that they were trying to achieve did not turn out like they thought. For example, consider nuclear energy. We were in the middle of this terrible war. It started small and regional, and it erupted into this huge worldwide disaster, millions of people dead. It's 1944, in late 1944, early 1945. The United States of America has developed a new technology, the ability to shoot a stray electron into the nucleus of an atom and cause this chain reaction to occur that can just obliterate a comparatively large area for the time, especially for the conventional weapons at the time. And they had two choices. They could allow these young American and Japanese men. Of course, at this point, this decision is being made. The campaign in Europe was coming to an end, and so it was now down to the Pacific campaign, with Japan, and it looked likely that America could win the war, but their projected casualties were still in millions more to come. And so it was a difficult decision that to either let several more years of fighting going as we moved towards Tokyo, and as we took island by island, and there are a bunch of little islands in the South Pacific. And so it was just going to be a brutal fight to the last man war. The Japanese refused to surrender. And so the other option was for several thousand people, I mean I think it was more than several thousands. It was probably tens of thousands by the time the whole thing was done. For the U.S. to demonstrate its weapon and the terribleness of that weapon, and so they targeted as military targets as they could, because this is not a precision bomb. I mean, this is a blow up everything around it kind of a deal, and kill a few thousand rather than allow this war to continue where millions would surely die in a continued terrible war. So that decision was made. Two atomic bombs were dropped on Nagasaki and Hiroshima, or Hiroshima. I heard people pronounce it both ways. I'm honestly not sure which is correct. Probably neither. And it ended the war. It forced Japan to surrender. They could not. They had no defense against such a terrible weapon. So on the one hand, imagine you're part of that team of people that developed that nuclear power, and it had the potential to do some really good things to end the war. It could be controlled into a reaction to create energy. Today we have nuclear power plants that basically work off of a controlled bomb that's exploding in slow motion. It creates steam, or there's different kinds of nuclear plants, but then we harness that energy and creates alternating current, and then we send that to our homes. So that's some positives. But also, this war that has once again begun in Europe, where you have a authoritarian dictator that's decided to just start mass killing people and taking over countries, that power, which is now 100x the destructive power that existed at the end of World War II, could kill billions of people, or everyone. But so obviously a terrible outcome. And so just imagine being a part of that team, and you could only invest what you had, your scientific ability, your ability with physics and uh, electricity to develop that bomb. You really had no control over the outcome. You could not foresee all the contingencies, the way that it would be used in a positive way or a negative way. It was just, and who are we to say that was the right thing, the wrong thing? It's tough. It's tough to make decisions like that. But those types of things, maybe not quite to that scale, those things happen in our life every day. We have a part in it, but yet we can't control the outcome. We can't foresee everything, every outcome. We can go into something with the best of intentions, and it can end up being a total disaster. The difference about living the Christian life and just being, walking without the Lord, is that when you walk with the Lord, you have a teammate who can see outside of our finite world. He understands the outcomes. He understands every minuscule, tedious outcome from now till the end of time, of all of the decisions and actions that we have to make. So, which is better? Just to throw it all to chance and just hope for the best and just kind of, make your best try hard and hope it all works out? Or to team up with this partner, form an alliance with this with this superpower, this kind of obviously bigger, even more impressive than this angel that apparently appeared with Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, but to join him and allow him to have influence and guidance and to coach you through life. Which one of those is more reasonable, is more rational? I've tried it both ways. I'll be honest. I wish I could say my whole life, I did. I grew up in church, so I had the benefit of that. I had the possibility of that. But there's several seasons of my life where I've just kind of gone my own way, done my own thing, just kind of thought somehow irrationally I knew better than God or was smarter than God, or I don't know what I was thinking. But and that always ended up in a disaster every time. Every time it was a disaster, and I just would wonder, like, why did I do that? What caused me to do that? But through those failures, I learned to trust God, to recognize that even in my sin, even though I'm imperfect, that I still don't think about things correctly, and that have the ability to know and understand everything about every situation. I know that the God that I walk with, He does understand those things. And I've also learned He's a very merciful, a very generous God. That times where I mess up, that I should suffer the consequences fully for what I did, He still showed grace and mercy. Now that doesn't mean we should test God and just kind of see what we can get away with. But it does mean that when our hearts are submitted to Him and we don't get it right, that there is grace for that. And I am grateful for that and recognize how undeserving I am to have that. And so tonight I want to leave you with that. I want to leave you with that choice, really. Which way will you go? Are you going to continue the path of just having expectations and hoping that this happens this way and this happens this way, and setting yourself up for disappointment and discouragement? Or are you going to take a moment in your life and draw a line in the sand and just begin? And I guess that's probably not correct. I don't know that it happens in a moment. It's more of a journey that begins when we begin to just let go. Just like I'm tightly holding on to this iPad, and I just don't want to let it go. Then if I were to just kind of gently lay it down, just take my hands off and just say, okay, God, I recognize that I can't fix everything, solve everything, and that even on my best day, I can end up creating a disaster, even though I had the best of intentions. I think that's why the old adage, the road to hell is paved with good intentions, because we think we know what is the best thing, and in the end, what we think is often not the best thing. But God's plan is always best. So I hope this story that we read in Daniel, and feel free to go back, read that again, focus on the details, think about how God's speaking to you through that. I believe that God has a message for everyone, that He's not just kind of out there and there's like these elect few that get to talk to Him. That was kind of the case at one time with the priests. He sent, even though we can't fully understand what that means and what it is, but He sent this presence, this part of God, part of Himself, this part of God, to walk with us through this world, as corrupt as it is, as terrible as things are right now. I mean, in time, I don't even want to think about how many people have been brutally murdered in the time that this porch talk has happened. So there are terrible things that are happening. And yet, God has offered, and He said in His Word, He is offering peace and abundance and a life that is full for those who would believe, for those who would submit themselves, humble themselves before Him, and not bow down to the golden statue of this world, of this culture. And so I'll leave you with that tonight. I hope that everybody has a blessed end of the week. I know tomorrow's Friday, so just stay the course. We're zeroing in on the goal, and if you have to work on the weekend, maybe you've had some time off this week and you're just getting going. Well, then we'll just pray God's blessing on you as you get things going. But I hope that things are good, and I hope that just as today we're starting to see a glimmer of spring for the first time in a long time, that if you've been struggling with discouragement and unmet expectations in your life, that perhaps this could be a freeing message for you, that this could be a freeing opportunity that would allow you to just begin to let go and let God. Well, blessings to you all. Hope you have a fantastic week. We'll see you again soon. Thanks.